And yet in 2003, the World Health Organization tried to tell us, that basically in this report said that it's processed foods that are causing chronic disease and obesity. And keep in mind, with obesity, there are over 40 health conditions associated with obesity. So imagine how much our healthcare costs would go down if, for example, public health would put warnings on processed foods like they did with cigarettes when we learned that cigarettes were associated with cancer. It's those middle aisles in the grocery store that are basically killing us and decreasing the quality of our lives. Now, I teach hours and hours and hours of classes to demonstrate this even further. Tonight you're just getting a sound bite. But my goal is to keep teaching and teach as many people as I can about the differences between nutrient-poor foods and nutrient-dense foods. And that's essentially what we need to honor when we see the World Health Organization warning us, and yet the media will not cover this story. This report only made a blip in the radar in the media. So these are the foods, essentially. I mean, I'm only giving you literally some snapshots here. Look at the foods that line our middle aisles. I mean, my goodness, they blind you. You can't see real food in the grocery store, beyond these aisles. They're blinding us. And they do nothing for your health. It doesn't matter how many fancy labels or claims are on these packages. They're not good for you, period. And of course, if in the 1950s, animal fats were blamed. Animal fats and cholesterol were the fall guys, so to speak, with regards to the increased rates of heart disease that were being witnessed back in that era. Unfortunately, sugar was disregarded. Sugar did not get blamed. It was the animal fats and cholesterol, and it really has done all of us a disservice that the scientific community took that stance and didn't look at the fact that it was our increased consumption in sugar that was really contributing to a lot of the inflammatory conditions that we're seeing today. Inflammatory conditions such as cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, of course. And just look, in 1700, we may have consumed 4 pounds of sugar per year. In 2000, it's about 150 pounds of sugar a year. And I mean, anybody with a rational mind can see that this has got to have an impact on our health. But the sugar lobby is very powerful in our governments, and it's very difficult to get this information out to people. Why would I write a book about addiction? Well, I think when you consider how addictive sugar is, how much people can consume in a day, and what it's doing to our nervous system, it's just been devastating to us as a species to see the decline in our physical and mental health as we have increased these very nutrient deficient, very damaging foods in our diets. Unprecedented in the history of mankind. So here's a shameless plug on my book, and I do this because I'm trying desperately to warn people about this rise in depression and mental disorders that we're seeing today and where it's going to with regards to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. We have got to look at nutrition, folks. We have no choice right now. And they will not. They think it's somehow testing that's going to solve these problems or drugs that are going to solve these problems. And my goodness, we've been using testing and we've been using drugs for decades now. And look at how sick we are. We've got to start putting attention into nutrition. So I wrote this book. It was a labor of love for me. And thank you very much. And addiction is our #1 health problem, by the way. So let's look at some science here just quickly. This was published in the Journal of Dental Research in 2009. Children with the best dietary practices were 44% less likely to exhibit severe early childhood caries compared with children with the worst dietary practices. Now, this doesn't say anything about dental decay being caused by a fluoride deficiency, does it? Okay, it's nutrition. So let's look at what a dentist discovered back in the 1920s and 30s. Dr. Weston A. Price, a genius in his time. In the 1920s, he started seeing a change in children. He had never seen cavities. He'd never seen crooked teeth. And keep in mind, he was treating the parents of these children. So he had a frame of reference to work with. And I encourage you all, after you leave here, to visit the website, westonaprice.org, to look more deeply into this issue, and to buy his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. We've got to change this healthcare crisis that we have. Dr. Price is actually a huge part of the solution. So the medical school, somebody at the medical school needs to read this book. And there's Dr. Weston A. Price. So after he started seeing tooth decay in the 1920s, he decided to travel around the world and see what was happening in other areas. And what he discovered, he found out that in primitive cultures where they had access to their local foods, minimally processed foods, nutrient-dense foods, that these people had beautiful teeth. And that in neighboring villages or towns where trucks were delivering condensed milk, margarine, jams, jellies, flour, sugar, all these newfangled foods, unprecedented in the history of mankind, basically, that these nutrient-deficient foods were displacing the nutrient-dense foods. And as that occurred in certain areas, then in the first generation, he could see the dental decay and the crooked teeth. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see that there's something that's very depleting about these foods when he took so many images as a result. So let's take a look at what may have happened in these neighboring areas in the South Pacific. Dr. Price's nephew was a photographer for National Geographic, so he had access to a camera and took hundreds and hundreds of pictures while he traveled the world. Now look at these young teenage boys and their teeth. Beautiful, straight teeth, virtually no cavities in these primitive cultures. And they didn't floss their teeth, they didn't brush their teeth, they didn't have fluoride in their water, or artificial fluoridated water. They had naturally straight, beautiful, healthy teeth. But then when he went into neighboring areas where they got the modernized, westernized foods, then he would see the devastation, the tooth decay, the crooked teeth, the narrow jaws, and from that you could see the rise in things like cancer and even tuberculosis, infectious diseases. In the Australian Aborigines, again, look at these gorgeous teeth. No dentists, no fluoridated water, no dental floss. Yet they were able to have beautiful teeth. And then in neighboring areas, of course, you see the sharp contrast. And even their genetics started to change as well in the last images on what I think would be my left here. You can see that their appearances actually began to change. And I have outside posters that you can take a look at, which will give you a summary of some of the foods that they may have been eating in these areas. And in Africa, again, look at these gorgeous teeth. And then the contrast where modernized foods were introduced. And you can see this if you even go into natural history museums. You can see skulls during archaeological digs. Where they've dug up some skulls before, for example, modern societies surfaced, or agriculture, for example, where you would have found even hunter-gatherers, very, very primitive hunter-gatherers. These skulls had beautiful, beautiful dental structures. So buried skulls throughout Australia in this image provide a dependable record of their physical excellence and splendid facial and dental arch forms. In the lower pictures are shown the skull dome of a typical Australian Aborigine for comparison with that of the recently discovered Peking man, who possibly lived about 1 million years ago. So you can do your own research on this, but you will find that these very primitive cultures, their skulls that are being dug up have beautiful teeth. Now, our Assistant Officer of Health, Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Warshawski, said at the Board of Health meeting that elderly people need fluoride because their teeth fall out, so they need fluoride, which I found a very strange remark because, no offense to any of my friends who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, or beyond, typically what I see with the elderly is they have terrible teeth. They're oftentimes wearing false teeth. Now, did our primitive cultures need false teeth? Well, what did Dr. Price find? Dr. Price found out that many primitive peoples not only retain all of their teeth, many of them into an old age, but also have healthy flesh supporting these teeth. This has occurred in spite of the fact that the primitives had not had dentists to remove the deposits and no means for doing so for themselves. So imagine that. The elderly, senior citizens in primitive cultures had beautiful teeth until they died. And this is what we see today with our children, of course, the very narrow jaws. I had, of course, pretty much in all of my teeth, I have fillings. Of course, I had to have orthodontics. I had to have straight. To get the teeth that I have right now, I needed some work done, of course. So my teeth were crooked. I'd say before I was 16. I think I had braces when I was about 16. So that's more commonplace today. And here's just some pictures in North America that we know here in North America. We have seen people who have beautiful wide jaws and straight teeth. There are people out there that have been raised on traditional foods and can achieve that beautiful dental health and that beautiful look, that nice wide jaw. So what I teach is the work of Dr. Weston A. Price. I taught my first class on Saturday. For the next 3 Saturdays, I will be completing my seminars and going into great detail on what foods actually cause these people to be so healthy, not just physically, but mentally. And so what I cover is the importance of healthy animal fats, pasture-fed animal foods, certain, even supplements like cod liver oil is tremendous, homemade bone broths, lacto-fermented condiments and beverages, and the proper preparation of grains. So I go into a tremendous amount of detail on these subjects for the next 3 weeks, right here at the library across the hall in the Stevenson and Hunt room. So I have brochures outside, flyers outside, or my website is pamkilleen.com for any information about any of the events I have coming up. So with all of these newfangled foods in our diet, of course, something very terrifying is going on with our children. They're the 3rd generation, 4th generation on a diet that's heavily emphasized in processed foods. So even this research that was published in 2005, according to doctors fear Ontario children may not live as long as their parents. And keep in mind that 20% of our children today during their childhood are diagnosed with a mental disorder. This is not due to a Ritalin deficiency. Okay, this is clear nutritional work that needs to be done on these children. Most precious people in society. So we need to do our due diligence as their caretakers. And so this is what I propose in my talks, is to reintroduce these wonderful nutrient-dense foods that we know for generations kept us healthy. It's not guesswork here. These are the foods that we know kept us healthy. So there's some of the dates. So March 5th, 12th, 19th, I'm going to be teaching across the hall here. My website's pamkilleen.com. And here's a quote, George Orwell: "In times of universal deceit, telling the truth will be a revolutionary act." Now, before I introduce our very special guest, Dr. Paul Connett, I want to point one little thing out here. It's a terrible little segue I just did, but I came across this information and I just can't resist telling you about it. I talk a lot about marketing and how we get drawn into products because they make all these wonderful claims. Because the food industry knows, for example, the more claims they can make, the more likely we're going to buy that product. And this was very true of toothpaste even in 1947. So what Pepsodent did in 1947 was it came out with an ad and basically fabricated a substance in the toothpaste to basically make it look sexier or more attractive. And so the ad said, "It's cleaner, brighter, taste means cleaner, brighter teeth. New Pepsodent, the only toothpaste containing irium, removes the film that makes your teeth look dull, uncovers the natural brilliance of your smile." And in a 1974 speech, the then FCC chairman, Reed Hunt, claimed that the irium mentioned in Pepsodent advertisements didn't exist. And it was somewhere shortly around this time, of course, that fluoride came to recognition. So at any rate, just wanting you to keep that in mind.